It's a pleasure having all of you in our first speakers series here at Georgetown of the Program for Jewish Civilization. I hope all of you already enjoyed the goodies out there, and if not, please feel free to get there and be well fed. My name is Yossi Shane, and I'm the director of the program, and we are delighted today that we have with us so many of our friends of the program, students, members of our EXCO. The talk today of Philo-Semitism by our new faculty, visiting faculty, Jacques Berlinerblau, and I will call later on Professor Bob Lieber, who's the head of our EXCO, to present our speaker. Before Bob will do so, I just want to say a few words about the program itself. The program at Georgetown in its current form was established about 2 years ago, and we are trying to establish to our best ability the best scholarly program we know on Jewish civilization broadly defined, with special emphasis of the program on Jews and international affairs. The school is located in the School of Foreign Service. The program, is located in the School of Foreign Service. And of course, by the nature of Georgetown, its interest in religion and international politics, we think this is the best place we could find. We have already secured very elaborate support and network, and we hope moreover, and we have a very elaborate committee that you can see in the publication that we have there and the brochures that you have. We, as I said, we already have also a very elaborate publication series that we are very proud of and is already being circulated around the globe, I must say, and we get letters and comments, and we're looking forward to more. This year we have, again, a very rich program, we believe. We begin today with Professor Berlinerblau, then we will have our own Nancy Sherman, followed by my own lecture, and then we will have Professor Jason Rosenblatt. All the dates and the nature of the lectures are in the papers that you got, so you can really follow very closely about our activities. On November 10th, in particular, I mentioned that we are fortunate and we're very grateful for Cardinal McCarrick, who is going to be delivering this year's lecture on Jewish Christian or Jewish Catholic relations, which, as you very well know, is the Israel's lecture. This will be the third time that we are having this lecture. And later on, we will have, toward the end of the semester, Bob Lieber, our own, who will talk about the American Grand Strategy and the case of Israel. So there are like 6 or 7 talks, and we may be, during the semester, may even add to that, because sometimes we benefit from visits to Washington of people that we would like to bring to campus. And if there will be additions to what you already have in your hands, we will announce it, and we are looking forward to having you. We are working hard on establishing our email address, and we would love you to just sign your names, those of you who have not done so yet, so we can inform you about our activities. We also are working hard on having a conference in January or February, we don't know yet exact date, on Israel and the United Nations, 30 years to Zionism is racism, the decision, and this whole relation of the United Nations with Israel and the Jews as part of our debate, and we already have secured participation from other centers here at Georgetown, including the Mortara Center, but many people from the world will come to this conference. In general, we are holding speaker series constantly, but also have the tradition, whatever, if the word means 2 years, the tradition is that we have one annual big conference. Last year it was on collective memory and international affairs, and we were very fortunate to have many excellent speakers and the support of the Ebert Stiftung. And the year before that, if you remember, we had on Jewish membership, it was Michael Walzer, Leo Bizeltier, A.J. Dion, and many others. And all of these will also come in special publications, some of which will be in our series, and some of which perhaps will be as we're working now on edited volumes. So we are very grateful for your presence here, and above all, we are thanking Melissa Spence, who is our coordinator, manager, chief of staff, all the good terms that we can, because as Bob always used the word indispensable, it's true, she's the only indispensable person of this operation, and she has been really a tremendous addition to our operation, and we are so grateful for everything that you can see here and many other things that she's doing. So thank you, Melissa. And to present our new chair professor, because we were grateful that this chair was endowed this year. We had a visiting chair for Jewish civilization this year that was endowed for 3 years. Bob will tell you about it. I am inviting now Bob Lieber, who is also indispensable, even though he uses the word only for Melissa. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Before I introduce our speaker, let me add just one or two things to Yossi's welcome. The program in Jewish civilization has made some remarkable strides in just the 2 years it's existed, really on a shoestring, but we're having some interesting achievements in raising funds for the program. We've accomplished some things already, and we've carried out a number of things that are really remarkable at this stage. The conferences and programs that Yossi has run as the director, the certificate, which is now available for students in School of Foreign Service, the equivalent of a minor, in this case in Jewish civilization, which is available for the first time this year. And thanks to the very good work of Father John Langen in philosophy, who heads our curriculum committee, along with Nancy Sherman, John Bull, and others, the College of Arts and Sciences has just one more step to go later next month in approving a minor in the college for students who wish to do a minor in Jewish civilization. Let me also add that in terms of faculty resources, in addition to Yossi Shane, who holds dual appointments here at Georgetown as Professor of Government and Director of the program in Jewish civilization, and who also holds a senior position at Tel Aviv University with the approval and agreement of both universities. Avi Ben-Zvi is again this year the visiting Goldman Israeli professor in the government department. It's not formally part of the PJC, but nonetheless the courses that Avi teaches are essential to the program as well. And this brings me in turn to introduce today's speaker. Jacques Berlinerblau is the visiting professor in Jewish civilization, thanks to a very generous gift made by the parents of an undergraduate student in the School of Foreign Service. Jacques is not only a brilliant scholar and associate professor of Hebrew, of Judaic studies, actually professor of religious studies at Hofstra University, where he heads and created a successful program in Jewish studies. But he's a fine teacher and a rising public intellectual. He did his first PhD in Hebrew and Judaic studies at New York University in 1991, and went on for a second PhD in theoretical sociology at the New School for Social Research in 1999. He is teaching courses this semester on the Bible and contemporary politics, and also on anti-Semitism and Philo-Semitism, an interdisciplinary approach. Next semester, and that schedule is just being set as we speak, he will teach a course on Jewish American literature, and it's a distinct possibility that he may team teach a course with the provost on
the Old Testament and Church Fathers, Hebrew Bible, Church Fathers.
Did you hear that in the back? The Old Testament
and the Church Fathers.
And the Church Fathers. Let me also add that we're fortunate to have quite a number of faculty members across the three campuses, law, medicine, and the main campus, who teach or research or write or speak in areas that in one way or another, through various disciplines and subjects, intersect with the curriculum of Jewish civilization. Let me add, there are a number of faculty members here. We're always trying to make sure that the listing of courses that we provide to interested students is as up-to-date as possible. So if any of you are teaching courses this spring, which we may not already know about until the schedule comes out, please let Melissa Spence know so that these can be added to the courses available for those students who have that interest. Finally, let me note that Jacques' latest book, The Secular Bible, Why Non-Believers Must Take Religion Seriously, has just been published by Cambridge University Press. It has a fabulous cover, but it's also a brilliant book. And with that, let me take great pleasure in introducing Jacques Berlinerblau.
Okay, I want to begin by thanking basically everyone at Georgetown. People here are so nice. I'm not used to this, I have to say that. I want to thank in particular Professors Lieber, Professor Shane, and Ms. Weinberg Spence, because I'm just having a great time. All right, now if I seem a little tired, I am. And I was giving a lecture last night at the New School for Social Research, and something happened that has never happened in my academic career. There was an intellectual brawl. That happens all the time, but it happened before the panel, all right? And the only... Sometimes in football games of late, there are fights before the game starts. That's the only thing I can think of. Right? I was not the instigator. I was doing my stretching, and all of a sudden, there was a conflagration amongst the panelists that somehow I was implicated in this. The second thing is, I'm going to deliver this paper. I've come to a conclusion that people don't like hearing scholars read off their papers. So I quip every now and then, and it gets me into trouble every now and then, right? But I hope that in exchange, it's a lot more interesting for the listeners. So my cardinal rule with my Georgetown students now, they're writing papers for me, and the rule is don't be boring, all right? So I'll try and apply the same rule to myself. Okay, with that said, here we go. The subject is a curious one on Philo-Semitism, and let's begin. Philo-Semitism as a subject of academic inquiry has something of an inferiority complex. This might be because everyone in this room knows what anti-Semitism is, but very few people, even extremely well-educated people, have ever heard of Philo-Semitism. When I tell people I'm working on it, what's that? What's that? These are even scholars in Judaica. I've never heard of that. What is that? Okay. Anti-Semitism, in contrast, is quite possibly one of the most thoroughly canvassed avenues of inquiry in the entire discipline of Judaic studies. Now, Philo-Semitism is relatively unexplored, but it is simply not correct to claim, as has nearly every single scholar of the phenomenon, and myself until about 4 months ago, that little has been written about the subject. All right? I went through a transition, which I think is of such dramatic interest, that I'd like it to be filmed. I'd like there to be a documentary about how I moved from a position in which I said, nobody ever writes about this, it's an obscure field, there's no research done on this, we're all alone. And then I realized it simply wasn't true, right? I was just replicating what other scholars had said about it. So I was thinking a 90-minute documentary, but IMAX, that's very important. I wanted to be an IMAX documentary of how I came to these steps. This has been asserted for decades, the fact that nobody writes about Philo-Semitism, and these are decades in which around 10 monographs and dozens of articles, almost all of very high quality. I want to stress that. I often venture into fields where I say publicly the quality of research in this field is extremely poor. And I've said that about many things that I've studied. Popular religion, for example, disaster, right? Theologically inflected, mendacious. But the level of scholarship on Philo-Semitism is excellent. So I would advise all of you who are interested to go out and read some of the texts that I'll be citing today. So there are 10 monographs, there are dozens of articles devoted to the intriguing phenomenon of people who claim to really like or admire Jews, i.e. Philo-Semitism, right? So if there's so little written about it, why did I spend half the month of July making photocopies, right here at the SFS, about articles pertaining to Philo-Semitism? The question is not why Philo-Semitism has been ignored. It is better to ask why the topic has garnered so little interest in comparison to anti-Semitism. Two mutually exclusive explanations for this imbalance can be identified. The first goes something like this. This is the classic. If philo-Semitism is not scrutinized as much as anti-Semitism, then this is because there is relatively little of it to scrutinize. Okay? Assuming that we associate philo-Semitism with some sort of appreciation for Jews, then for most of history, Jews have been, shall we say, unappreciated. Does not the empirical record yield massive evidence of Judeophobia? Researchers have thus delegated their efforts in proportion to the grim historical facts. A second answer directly contradicts the first, and this is where the action is, and it has the added advantage of raising really controversial and troubling issues about Jewish history and Jewish historiography. This explanation starts from the premise that there has been a good deal of philo-Semitic thought and action across the past 2 millennia. The problem is that scholars systematically neglect it or downplay its significance, scholars who are usually Jewish, incidentally, and early murmuring of this approach can be found in the writings of the legendary historian Philo-Baron, 2 historians that I really came to appreciate researching this, Philo-Baron and Cecil Roth, who are almost never cited anymore. They're really great historians. I mean, it's such a pleasure to read them, right? The kind of gobbledygook of the academic jargon is so missing in their writing. Baron coined the phrase the Lachrymose Theory, and it has hung over Jewish studies like a cloud or a sun, depending on your perspective. What did he mean by the Lachrymose Theory? He meant that scholars of Judaica inclined to view history prior to emancipation as an unending chronicle of persecutions and humiliations. Yet Jewish life in the Middle Ages and early modernity, Baron famously argued, wasn't that bad, or at least no worse than the misery-drenched lives led by masses of unprivileged Gentiles. This comment was made in 1925, I believe, he first coined the phrase, and it just keeps reappearing in Jewish studies. Why? We'll get to that. The assertion that researchers systematically fail to accentuate the positive in Jewish intergroup relations appears in 2 studies published in the 1980s. The first is the rather naive Jew and Gentile, the philo-Semitic aspect by Solomon Rappaport. Rappaport writes, quote, "It is forgotten that the Jewish people existed in many countries in the course of centuries under various cultural systems in comparative quiet and ease, enjoying a measure of tolerance and understanding." That was Rappaport's work. A more sober assessment was offered by Alan Edelstein. And I don't know, maybe Alan Edelstein is here today. If anyone knows Alan Edelstein, I want to meet Alan Edelstein. This book is revolutionary. I do mean it. It is a book that has not received its due. The name of the book is, listen to the title, An Unacknowledged Harmony, Philo-Semitism and the Survival of European Jewry. This was written in 1983, it was published. My take is it did not receive a favorable reception in Jewish studies. I think you'll understand why immediately. Edelstein suggested that for whatever reasons, researchers may have felt more comfortable writing about hatred and mistreatment of Jews. This predisposed them to ignore what struck him as an obvious truism, brace yourselves, were it not for Christian European acceptance of this tiny demilitarized minority, they would have been wiped out a long time ago. That was the Edelstein hypothesis, right? 1983, 1982, in Unacknowledged Harmony. Edelstein was not denying the existence of Judeophobia. Rather, he saw an attitude of tolerance toward Occidental Jewry as a crucial genocide-averting counterbalance. Philo-Semitism, in his analysis, is something like a crumple zone, right? It's a barrier that prevented a far greater civilizational wreck for the long-suffering Jewish people. Going a bit further, albeit cautiously, was the very sober historian David Katz, who aired the most provocative speculation of them all. It may be, Katz remarked, that we need to think again about whether philo-Semitism, rather than anti-Semitism, is the normative condition which has degenerated over time. Can anybody say paradigm shift? I mean, this is what the stakes are in this debate. I'm not necessarily endorsing Katz's conclusion, right? But what is interesting about the debate on philo-Semitism is all the kind of cognitive terms, all the frameworks for making sense of Jewish history get flipped over. Right? And we have to stop looking at anti-Semitism and looking at its opposite as a means of making sense of Jewish survival. Okay. Although a considerable amount has been written on this topic, I have yet to see any researcher suggest what the deeper relevance of the discussion might be. In my view, the burgeoning debate points to a congeries of questions that scratch at some of the most sensitive wounds in the Jewish psyche. Those who probe this issue are often asking about the existential place of Jews in the world. The discourse on Philo-Semitism ponders whether Gentiles are truly ready to accept Jews, qua Jews. It asks if non-Jews can be trusted, and it wonders if Jews are really the inveterate pariahs that the history of anti-Semitism suggests that they are and have always been. So in hopes of providing some foundation for this discussion, I'm going to start reviewing for you what the term Philo-Semitism is, where it comes from, so on and so forth, and maybe we can move forward. And I was just speaking to somebody who does research on this subject, and this scholar mentioned to me that he thought he might have hit a dead end. I also thought I might have hit a dead end with this, and I don't know why. I don't know why it's hard to squeeze juice out of this topic. Maybe we can open that up as we go further. And I do expect a very rancorous question and answer session. One disclaimer, by the way, my preference is always literature. If I could, I would fictionalize my life. In fact, I try to live a fictional life. I always tell my students it's the only way to live, right, is to live fictionally. I am not going to deal with a booming field in this conversation of philo-Semitic fiction, even though, quite honestly, that would be my strength. All right, I'm not going there. For a variety of reasons. Most of them have to do with the fact that I would have to read many of these works in the original German, which I haven't gotten to yet, right? Anything from Thomas Mann to a fellow by the name of Sacher Mosach, I always mispronounce his name. There's some fascinating stuff written in late 19th century German, all right, about Jews. You'd never think that there would be German philo-Semitism, but at least 3 really interesting monographs have come out of this subject in the last 5 years. Okay, here we go. Anti-Semitism was the neologism apparently coined by Wilhelm Marr in 1879, the star-crossed author of The Victory of Judaism over Germanism and the founder of the Anti-Semitic League, would later in life renounce hatred of Jews as he faded into miserable obscurity. He's the person who coined the term anti-Semitism. He's also the person who married not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 Jewish women, right? He's also the person who was accused of being a Jew. Right? And he's also the person who was eventually added into the pantheon of the Altmeister, the old masters of anti-Semitism, by the Nazi Party in 1944. It stuns me that they had nothing better to do, right, than go back and check out his anti-Semitic credentials in 1944, right, as the world is falling apart, right? They wanted to make sure he was the real deal. And apparently Wilhelm Marr was the real deal, but apparently not if you read Moshe Zimmerman's biography. The term he invented, with its resonances so congenial to the racialist zeitgeist of the 19th century, Semitism, right, would take immediate hold. Marr's immensely popular tract reignited a not-so-dormant discussion, one that had been a preoccupation of German intellectuals since the time of Luther. Luther. Just get me started on Luther. The conversation was this: the systematic and learned exploration of the numerous and sundry demerits of the Jews. In my anti-Semitism class, we start off every class by repeating a line from Luther. I have a student do it for me. The Jews are our misfortune, right? We're doing it in English, right? And then we're going to move to German, all right? And we'll do it in French, Flemish, we'll move through all Hebrew, right? I find the line mystifies me, right? And absolutely fascinates me, right? The Jews are our misfortune. That's Luther. As Wolfram Kinzig has observed, it is within the context of this debate about anti-Semitism that the term Philo-Semitismus and its derivative, Semitenfreundlich, I don't know how to translate, Jew-befriending, Jew-friending, something like that, would surface around 1880. Those who criticized Jews took especial pleasure in dubbing assorted German liberals, the liberals are always the problem, as Philo-Semites. The German liberals, interestingly enough, repeatedly denied the claim. Many went out of their way to insist, no, we don't like Jews, all right? This isn't why we're defending them, all right? But it was out of fealty to greater principles or loftier principles of toleration, democracy, and so on that they ended up defending Jews. But they never wanted to be tarred, right, with the brush of actually liking Jews, right, which is very interesting about that conversation. That which occurred in Imperial and Weimar Germany actually replicates a phenomenon seen throughout Jewish history. Let us call this the anti-Semitic call and response pattern. It goes something like this. a cascade of negative observations about Jews elicits a smaller, albeit tenacious demurral from Jews and non-Jews alike. Okay, the pattern occurs in the realm of fiction in the book of Esther. Here is Esther 3:8. All right, there is a certain people scattered and separated among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's law, so that it is not appropriate for the king to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued for their destruction. All right, the machinations of Haman. Esther, as is well known, craftily counters Haman's plot and convinces the bumbling Persian monarch to spare the Jews. A similar denunciation about the Jews is made in the Bible in Ezra 4. And what fascinates me about even the Hebrew Bible, and I repeat the realm of fiction, please see my book, The Secular Bible, is this trope, right, of the troublesome Jews in an entirety that have to be dealt with, they have to be wiped out. It's already fictionally cast by, I guess we can call them at this point, Jewish writers in about the 5th or 4th century BC. It's already there, right? And then it gains momentum in antiquity, okay? Think of Josephus's Against Apion, for example. It is a lengthy defense of the Jews against this Apion, who we only know, I believe, through fragments. But this does not exhaust the copious documentation of Jew dislike in antiquity. Anyone who reads Theodore Reinach's 1895 Texte autour grec et roman relatif au judaisme can appreciate this. What it is he collected all the Greco-Roman writers who said things about Jews. Right? It's immense. Right? It was replicated by another Israeli scholar by the name of Stern. Right? There are hundreds of remarks about Jews in this volume. I think 80% of them are extremely negative. Right? In our anti-Semitism and philo-Semitism class, we're trying to understand the significance of this. Here's one really food to munch on, if you will. Before the advent of Christianity, there was already what we might call, without being anachronistic, something approximating anti-Semitism. This was a fact, by the way, that anti-Semites in late 19th century Germany seized on. Right? So everywhere they go, right? Before Christianity, amongst pagans, amongst Greco, they're disliked. They're trouble. All right? So you don't have to be a Christian to dislike them. Everyone dislikes them. 2 points emerge from this digression. First, in terms of discourse, anti-Semitism and philo-Semitism are twin conversations. They are paired in time and space. In most historical contexts, the conversation is asymmetrical. The anti-contributions precede and dwarf the philo ones. As indicated by the 2 representative samples I gave you from the ancient world and modern Germany, the hateful call is much louder, than the defensive response. In the contemporary United States, conversely, any vaguely anti-Semitic remark made by a public official would meet with a torrent of denunciations, right? As Pat Buchanan, I believe, found out a couple of years ago. Right. The second point is that Jews, perhaps more than any other social grouping in history, are subjects of conversation. They are the discussed people, right? Discussed. Why are Jews discussed so much? Perhaps this is a fate that befits the first people in history to generate a book about themselves, right? A book that you could reference and argue with and bring up in disputation. But another answer comes to mind, one explicitly raised in the book of Esther, and one that any serious student of Judaica must take very seriously. Jews are pondered endlessly because they are different. We shall return to this point momentarily. Just face it, they're different. Okay, the types of philo-Semitism. This might be a little bit pedantic, so I'll try to walk us through this as quickly as possible. I don't want to engage in it. It's a six-fold Weberian typology of philo-Semitism. That can be a little bit boring. There will be philo-Semitic blends to consider, but for the historians in this room who are still trying to get a sense, what is this thing? Maybe this will help out. Okay, the most historically prevalent and significant type might be referred to as Christian philo-Semitism. It has many forms, but I will limit myself to 2 major subsets. The first and most well-known and most interesting for all of us as Americans in the year 2005, I'm assuming people living in the modern world, is known as Apocalyptic Millenarianism. Its rudiments can be traced back to the writings of the Church Fathers, though I still haven't checked that out enough. I've seen some of it in Augustine. I haven't traced the lineage sufficiently to lecture knowledgeably on it. but they are amplified amongst the Protestant sectaries of early modernity. Most varieties make very creative use, as far as I can tell, of biblical citations from the book of Daniel and Revelation to forward a very peculiar argument, which goes something like this. In order for the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth to occur, two things must happen. One is that the Jews must be gathered to Israel. The second is that they must be converted. In these theologies, the ultimate fate of Christianity is yoked to Judaism uncomfortably for both religions, right? They're kind of imbricated with one another in ways that I guess they'd rather not be imbricated. Apocalyptic Millenarianism hits its stride in 17th century England. There, one finds what the anthropologist Hugh Trevor Roper referred to as a, quote, genuine, if somewhat crack-brained cult of the Jews. One can sample the millenarian fervor in the Fifth Monarchy men of Oliver Cromwell's time. Cromwell himself, according to some, seemed to share this philo-Semitic orientation. The question is always raised, why did the English all of a sudden readmit the Jews around 1655? Why are they having public discussions? They kicked them out in 1290. That wasn't very nice. 1655, with this Rabbi Ben Manasseh, who I'm sure some of you have heard of, all of a sudden the Jews come back. Why? All right? It is a rather interesting debate. One argument is ideationally, at this period in England, they are very well predisposed towards Jews precisely because of these millenarian conceptions. Also move forward to the Balfour Declaration, or the pro or philo-Semitic streak in England is noticeable, probably more noticeable than any other country in the world. You certainly don't see it in France, put it that way, right? The history of French philo-Semitism is a pamphlet, right? The history of English philo-Semitism is, you know, a good book by Cecil Roth. All right. Or Todd Anderson, by the way. Okay, let's continue. Now, British supporters, as I said, of Zionism in the early 20th century and late 19th century were clearly, unequivocally, Gladstone, Balfour, and company motivated by philo-Semitic sentiments, right, emanating from a religious view of the world. Jerry Falwell, in modern times, right, associated with something called dispensational premillenarianism, is associated with his name and many evangelicals, and perhaps, but it is kind of a mystery, perhaps some of the political scientists in this room can help us, a certain sitting American president. But I don't know, all right? I can't tell what's fact and what's fiction, whether he actually subscribes to these views of the world, right? It maintains the newest version, the premillennial version, right? That while believing evangelicals, both living and dead, I like that part, are raptured in the air for 7 years, all right? They're literally going to be in the air, raptured, right? A cosmic drama between good and evil will play itself out in the Holy Land, with the Jews playing the central role. The Jews are crucial to the scheme. A much more benign form of Christian philo-Semitism, completely different, has been invoked by Christians again and again, especially when Jews are in tremendous physical danger. It reasons that Jesus Christ was a Jew, he was a rabbi, he was circumcised, he spoke Aramaic and read Hebrew scripture. Jews deserve respect because God once chose them to receive his first covenant and because he brought his son into this world as a Jew. Some of the most supernal acts of kindness by Christians have been committed in the name of this conception. Edelstein, for his part, insists, and he has convinced me, that many popes going back to Gregory I were, quote, friendly and protective of the Jews. He also observes that the Third Lateran Council of 1179 extended tolerance to the Jews, here comes my Latin, pro sola humanitate, on the grounds of humanity alone. As we're about to leave religion, let me add that to the best of my knowledge, there is no tradition of Islamic philo-Semitism. Now, you could read that with a little shudder, but in terms of what you're about to see, and that is this ferocious, blistering Jewish critique of philo-Semitism, it might not be a slight to Islam to say they never developed a philo-Semitic tradition. All right, so hold on to that insight. Other types, let's do them very quickly. With their expertise in banking and currency, with their transnational contacts, with their ability to raise capital as fast as the demands of warfare required, Jews were always financial assets, at least wealthy Jews. All right? Hence, economic philo-Semitism stems from an appreciation for Jewish fiscal prowess. Where do we find many examples of economic philo-Semitism? Venetians in the 16th century happily welcomed those glamorous, spectacular Sephardic Jews from Spain, and they were spectacular. I mentioned on many occasions I've taught in Venice, and I've looked at the Ashkenazi synagogues, which are kind of, you know, and then there were these Sephardic synagogues, which are just astonishing. According to local lore, the Sephardic Jews were very insistent that they wanted their coat room to be larger than the entire Ashkenazi synagogues in the gamut. It's very funny. Where you took off your coats, they were, I don't know, Versace Jews. They were spectacular. They're a different type of Judaism altogether. And for the record, my mother is a Sephardic Jew. So it's been drummed into my head that we are the children of princes and princesses, unlike those other Jews. Okay, on we go from the shadows. Economic philo-Semitism, the Venetians, of course, the Rothschilds. How many volumes need to be written about the Rothschilds and Austrian princes, right? Many argue that it was financial considerations that impelled Cromwell to readmit the Jews. But that is a huge debate. See David Katz in particular. Liberal forms of philo-Semitism emerged in the Emancipation era. The liberal wanted to emancipate the Jew, to liberate them, to grant them equal rights, to extend them full civil liberties. The problem is that there was a very sinister exchange, and the exchange went something like this, and we can capture this in the words of a French parliamentarian, Clermont Tonnerre, in a speech to the French Parliament in 1789. I know it's a little bit before emancipation, but it's very, very significant. Please write this down, even if you're not taking a class with me. To the Jews as individuals, everything. To the Jews as a nation, nothing. All right, so you take Politics 101, Advent of the Nation State, Rise of the Individual, so on and so forth. This is actually a very loaded phrase, these two sentences. Another form, which I really don't like, might be described as survivalist philo-Semitism. Here, a Gentile lauds Jews for their shrewdness, their ability to survive, their tenacity against all odds. Judaism is admired, but often in the way that one admires a roach. Reflexes of this theme are seen in Luther's writing. Nietzsche, who I like very much, occasionally points to the immense survivability of the Jews. He believes they have a good disposition, right? They digest well, in some of his rather humorous asides. Irving Lewis Horowitz, who is going to become a central player in our opera, sees a sinister underpinning to survivalist philo-Semitism, for it sees Jews, quote, in possession of a conspiracy of survival. The sneaky Jews, right? The Jews who are always plotting behind the scenes, right? In recent years, and I just learned this surfing the web, so this was not from the library, by the way, right? An evolutionary psychologist at California State Long Beach by the name of Kevin McDonald. Has anyone heard of Kevin McDonald? Oh my, okay. Has raised some eyebrows by publishing with legitimate academic presses and suggesting that Jewish genetic superiority, right, is coupled with certain types of Jewish ideational orientations, and this is why they persevere. They're clannish, right? They're shrewd, they're intelligent, and he's bringing culture and genes together to basically say what Wilhelm Marr, the founder of anti-Semitism, said: Germandom is defeated by Judaism, right? Judaism vanquishes all. Now, some Jews in the audience might be very flattered by that, but I think ultimately everyone sees where that's going, all right? That type of conversation, right? The strong Jews, the sneaky Jews, the omnipotent Jews. I don't think it's a conversation we want to start again. A fourth category will not detain us here. This would refer to philo-Semitic kitsch, okay? Madonna's embrace of Kabbalah, right? The fans of the Dutch soccer team Ajax, who come to soccer games wearing streimels and yarmulkes and Israeli flags, right? Certainly there is a scholar out there writing a monograph about this, but that scholar is not me. Okay, moral philo-Semitism hinges on feelings of guilt experienced by non-Jews. In post-World War II Germany, for example, there seem to be palpable expressions of regret for the Holocaust. But hold on, all right, wait till the Jewish scholars assess the sincerity of these expressions of regret. The final category is intellectual philo-Semitism, and it has its roots in what is known as Christian Hebraism. Christian Hebraism is really fascinating for me as a Bible scholar. In the first half of the 16th century, Protestants and Roman Catholics both came to the conclusion, independently, that the study of Hebrew was necessary for a full understanding of their scriptures. Subsequently, they have always been non-Jewish intellectuals who were simply interested in rabbinic exegesis out of sheer curiosity, and also to illuminate their own religious thinking, or interested in Jewish customs and Jewish dialects, right? This was done, pace, post-colonial thought, not out of a congenital Christian Occidental desire to subjugate the others. I'm a little bit exhausted with this equation that all forms of knowledge in the 19th century and 20th century were attempts to obliterate the other, the whole Saidian matrix, right? The Jews, after all, were already a subjugated other. You didn't need to know more about them in order to subjugate them more. So it's not a knowledge power Foucauldian interloop, right? Not every scholarly endeavor, not every intellectual curiosity is a veiled machination of power. And I won't say anything more on it, but it gets me. I lose sleep over it, as we say. All right? The critique, and now the fun part begins. Let us shift from historical sociology to historiography. Let it be noted that every single type of philo-Semitism that I've mentioned here has been subjected to absolutely horrific, brutal, bloody, almost unwatchable critique by scholars. Now, we have to speak the unspeakable. The scholars in question are scholars of Jewish studies, right? Nearly all of them, almost to a man, there are some women, but there are usually men chiming in on these issues, are Jews themselves. Something which I think isn't discussed enough. What does it mean if the entire field of Jewish studies is Jews studying Judaism? Well, there is an irony in this. I mentioned earlier that the Jews were the most discussed people, right? I think they solved the problem by discussing themselves, right? Now they have the discussion about themselves. What it means in terms of discourse in a university, in terms of the tilt and orientation of Jewish studies, well, we could do a seminar on that, could we not? All right, the most theoretically framed assault on the concept was issued by the postmodernist Zygmunt Bauman, a Polish Jew, by the way, who I believe emigrated, yes, to England, not immediately after World War II. He actually stayed in Poland for about 10, 15 years, and then he went, if I'm not mistaken, to the University of Nottingham. Borrowing a term from Archer-Sanduar, Bauman spoke of allo-Semitism, quote, the practice of setting the Jews apart as a people radically different from all the others, needing separate concepts to describe and comprehend them, and special treatment in all or more social intercourse, unquote. Allo-Semitism, Bauman continued, quote, does not unambiguously determine either hatred or love of Jews, but contains the seeds of both, that whichever the two appears is intense and extreme. Okay. Bauman insinuates that Philo-Semitism exists only because Christians perceive Jews as radically different. Yet Bauman never ponders an intriguing possibility, namely, that the Jews are different. The point might be illustrated by turning back to Greco-Roman antiquity. The ancient historian Shia Cohen, who I'm very fond of, I must say, I speak about him repeatedly in my book. I'll tell you why I'm fond of him, because he's an Orthodox Jew that repeatedly in his scholarship says things that infuriate Orthodox Jews. I can't tell you how much courage it takes for him to argue, well, we can get into the issues at another point. He's kind of a role model for me in terms of religious studies. That I have certain, shall we say, differences with the American religious studies establishment. That book is a kind of love letter to the religious studies establishment. And Shia Cohen is one of the few scholars that really, I cannot criticize him for this, because I admire his critical integrity. Okay, Shia Cohen is looking at the history of Jews in the Greco-Roman world. He's reading the Reinach book, which I mentioned earlier. He's reading the Sternbein. He's reading all these comments about Jews, all right? And this is what Cohen concluded. The Jews of antiquity wanted equality with tolerance, to be allowed to be the same as everyone else, while also being different from everyone else, unquote, right? Cohen's conclusion is, if people dislike them in antiquity, it's fully understandable. All right? This was Shia Cohen's conclusion. Why were the Jews of late antiquity different? Well, they were different. They worshipped an imageless God. They refrained from eating pork. They refused to acknowledge pagan deities. They refused to fight on the Sabbath, which the Romans apparently thought was bizarre, right? They were circumcised and so on. The sheer strangeness of the Jews was a source of never-ending awe to pagans in ancient times. In modernity and post-modernity, Jews are different as well, but for different reasons. They are different in part because they are so different from one another. They cannot be categorized as any one thing. They are neocons in the Bush administration and pro-Palestinian advocates. They are Lubavitchers in Brooklyn with all their sartorial trimmings and actors and actresses wearing Marc Jacobs. They are Hollywood elites and the people who bring you Commentary magazine. On Friday night, Jerusalem becomes something of a no-fly zone for any sort of fun or pleasure. Meanwhile, some clubs in Tel Aviv seem to be intent on acting out scenes from Petronius' Satyricon. All of this difference, all of this heterogeneity beguiles certain non-Jews. Call it the post-emancipation Jewish magic dust. All right? A question we might ask as we end this digression is as follows. Is being like the others the ransom price that contemporary Judaism must pay in order to live in peace and tranquility? And is it too high a price to pay? Jewish normalization. Okay. But back to our main theme. Bauman contends that a philo-Semite is born of the same ideational DNA as an anti-Semite. Irving Lewis Horowitz, equally skeptical. Irving Lewis Horowitz had dinner, all right, with a philo-Semite. And he lost his mind, all right? You can read the article in midstream. It's fascinating, right? I've never seen so much venom be produced by one stray remark over a dinner. And he wrote this article in midstream complaining about what this philo-Semite had said to him at dinner. So Irving Lewis Horowitz is not a fan of philo-Semitism. Horowitz says, a philo-Semite whose love is rebuffed by a hard-headed Jew will undergo an easy glide to anti-Semitism. Notice that for Bauman and Horowitz, philo-Semitism and anti-Semitism emanate from the same basic stuff. For others, the two are actually indistinguishable. They are the same thing. Ernst Bloch, who's quite the character, writes, quote, a philo-Semite is an anti-Semite that loves Jews. Okay. Paul Rose, who wrote a rather controversial book on revolutionary anti-Semitism in Germany, dismisses philo-Semitism as a false category. It's not even a category. Don't even bother studying it as scholars because it's not real. Daniel Jonah Goldhagen, talk about controversy, speaks of philo-Semites as, quotes, anti-Semites in sheep's clothing. We can go on and on and on. Surveying the writings on the topic, one scholar speaks of the widespread assumption that philo-Semitism is anti-Semitism in disguise. That's Corders. Now, Corders doesn't believe that. He's just surveying what people say about philo-Semitism. And he, too, is struck by the vehemence, right, by which Jewish scholars reject the category of philo-Semitism. In a few cases, it is held that philo-Semites are aware of their Judeophobia, right, but they are cunning, dissimulating despisers of the Jews. In other words, they hide it, all right? They know they hate Jews, right, but they pretend, right, in a very theatrical manner, to love the Jews, all right? But for the most part, philo-Semites are seen by Jewish scholars as oblivious to their alleged anti-Judaism, all right? So they're not only hateful, they're stupid, all right? It's that coupling, right? They hate Jews and they don't know they hate Jews, right? Their own motivations are obscured to themselves. Christian philo-Semites, for example, often seem well-intentioned enough, but they simply do not understand how unnoble their motivations might be. Todd Endelman, a very fine scholar, summarizes this point very well when he remarks that, quote, Christian philo-Semites love Jews not as Jews, but rather as peculiarly valuable potential converts to the Christian faith. Philo-Semitic Christian groups, he continues, do not grant Judaism a theological legitimacy of its own, independent of future hopes for the absorption of Jews into Christendom. It's a very, very cynical view, but it gets worse. As for liberal philo-Semitism, Horowitz writes, too often for Christian philo-Semites, enlightenment meant separating Jews from Judaism, not in the name of Christianity, as much as a broadly based humanism and pantheism to which no reasonable person could object. Notice again the utter disregard in which the philo-Semite is held. They are not only deluded, but they are hateful of Jews. Perhaps no category that we mention comes in for more abuse than the category of moral philo-Semitism. And by this I mean in particular regret over what's been done to the Jews. Hannah Arendt, who I consider my grandmother intellectually, right, speaks of cheap philo-Semitism in post-war Germany. Discussing the same period, Ernst Bloch remarks that, quote, philo-Semitism is a patronizing way of making amends. In his somewhat brutal assessment of the Federal German Republic, Frank Stern viewed philo-Semitism as, quote, a convenient stance advocated by hypocritical Germans who cloak themselves in penitential garments, right? And he's very convincing. I don't necessarily agree with this, but that work is extremely convincing in developing this critique of German philo-Semitism. You know, it's 1945, let's put on 50 productions of Nathan the Wise, all right? This kind of a play that keeps appearing in German. I'm very surprised to find that I have friends who are German that can quote scripture and verse from Nathan the Wise. I mean, this is a rather obscure work, quite frankly. I don't think Lessing is not Goethe, I mean, after all, right? So why people are quoting, anyway. All right, so these views refuse to grant any authenticity or even intelligence to philo-Semites. Throughout history, Jews have often rejected philo-Semitism for these very reasons. Others have behaved tactically. Here things get very nasty. And taken the putatively deluded philo-Semites for all they are worth. All right? One sees this in the quite comical protestations of the Evangelical London Jewish Society in the 19th century. So you have these organizations set up to kind of give charitable aid to these miserable, poor Jewish communities in London, right? And the complaint they make over and over again is that the Jews are taking our charity, they're taking our food, and damn it, they're not converted to Christianity, right? We haven't converted one single Jew, right? Now, Engelman has some funny cases of Jews who did convert, but just did it to cash in, right? Jews who were kind of living as Moranos, crypto Jews, right? Who were worshiping secretly, claiming to be Christians. It's very comic, if you ask me, right? On a somewhat more serious level, one sees this in the way that the State of Israel and various pro-Israel American groups have embraced Christian conservatives. This was a policy clumsily initiated by David Ben-Gurion and refined by Menachem Begin to perfection. The latter did all he could to accommodate American evangelicals in Israel. What emerges is an epic comedy in which both sides are seeking to take advantage of the other. Evangelicals need Jews to convert so that Christ can come again. Israelis need evangelicals to further Israel's geopolitical interests, in particular vis-a-vis the United States. I was thinking if we wanted a Jewish comedian to do this, who could it be? Would it be Larry David? No, he's too local and topical. It would be Mel Brooks. I think he's the only, and he's old, right? He's the only person that could capture the kind of grand sweep, right? This comic relationship between Christian evangelicals and the State of Israel. I am happy to report, however, that not all responses to philo-Semitism have been rejectionist or tactical, nor do all scholars discount philo-Semitism as completely useless. Engelman observes that, quote, every philo-Semite meant one less potential anti-Semite. Hillary and William Rubenstein, who we haven't mentioned yet, see the work of British evangelicals as sincere. Quote, their ultimate aim was the voluntary conversion of the Jews, but their short-term goal was the amelioration of Jewish suffering. Even Irving Lewis Horowitz could concede that anti-Semitism and philo-Semitism do not merit the same level of opprobrium. Irving Massey, one of these scholars writing about 19th century German literature, in an interesting study, remarks, and here he is, he's unarmed, he said, there are just some people who like Jews. Face it, all right? There are people out there, right, for very good reasons, who like to be around Jews. I've met people like this in my life, and I haven't been able to detect some very sinister anti-Semitic motive. A sensible ground rule was laid down by Celia Heller in her discussion of modern Polish philo-Semitism. Quote, whenever a persecuted minority exists, there are some members of the majority who are positively disposed towards that minority. All right? So for a minority of writers in Jewish studies, philo-Semitism isn't all that bad. Let's conclude. As we draw to a close, let us ask, what is a philo-Semite? Let's define it. In terms of thought, it is a person who externally professes admiration, appreciation, or support for Jews or Judaism. In terms of deeds, it is a person who consciously engages in actions aimed at benefiting Jews or Judaism. So far, so good. But platitudes such as these cannot remain unmolested by scholarly cynicism. As we saw above, a person who claims to adore Jews might be faking it. Even if the philo-Semite in question is earnest, he or she may be harboring unconscious resentment towards the object of appreciation. As for deeds, let's just say that good intentions can go hopelessly awry. It has happened more than once in history that a Gentile's sincere attempt to help Jews has backfired in the worst possible way. So maybe the critics discussed above are right. Maybe philo-Semitic thought and action is just bad for the Jews, a false category that should be abandoned. Traditional Jewish responses to philo-Semitism also do not suggest that this category has a bright future. Jews have sensed, often correctly, that Christian philo-Semites aspire to convert them. Liberal anti-Semites, Jews have concluded, seek to eliminate Judaism on the backstroke by eliminating religion in general. Moral philo-Semites, they feel, want to assuage their own guilt, and Jews, needless to say, do not feel compelled to offer them a sympathetic shoulder to cry on. Mindful of these problems, many Jews reject philo-Semitism altogether. But where does that leave Jews? It leaves them perennially suspicious. It leaves them incapable of understanding one fairly obvious message of the Book of Ruth. I'm not going to say the message of the Book of Ruth, but I think you know what I'm speaking about. It leaves them incapable of making sense of the Talmudic adage that, quote, all the righteous of the Gentiles have a portion in the world to come, which you find in Maimonides, who misquotes something from Sanhedrin, because maybe it was expunged, and we can get into that issue as we go forward. In short, it leaves Jews radically alone in this world. It shows them to be as ill-disposed towards the other as anti-Semitic ideology has always insisted they are. This is the conundrum of philo-Semitism for Jews. Are there then any kinds of philo-Semitism that can pass muster? I would suggest two legitimate forms. The first construes philo-Semitism as anti-Semitism, nothing more, nothing less. It consists of no hyperbolic fondness for Jews, only a conviction that Judeophobia is morally wrong and must be combated. The second is intellectual philo-Semitism. This is the project that studies foundational Jewish texts and interpretations of those texts. It looks at what Jewish thinkers made of these texts. And since the old adage about 2 Jews, 3 opinions is factually correct, intellectual philo-Semitism comes to appreciate Jewish difference, which is the absolute truth of the Jewish predicament. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
First, just a very brief comment. Thank you. I think what you really illustrated above all was the complexity of the human mind.
This is why literature is a better way of getting at this
which is
question.
capable of holding totally opposed opinions and judgments at the same time. Just to comment on your remark that there is no tradition of Islamic philo-Semitism, what about the cases like Muslim Spain, the Ottoman invitation to the Sephardic Jews when they were expelled, and the very high positions to which Jews rose in Muslim administrations? It would seem to me that fit at least economic philo-Semitism.
I think you're right. Yeah, so the 2 examples would be the astonishingly high positions that Jews acceded to, right? As viziers, for example, in the Iberian Peninsula. There's no doubt about that. There's also, what was the exact quote from the Sultan? Queen Isabella expulses her Jews, but I welcome them, let them, right? So yeah, one could see that as philo-Semitic. I was thinking more, not in terms of political leaders, but a kind of theological, like something coming from the ulama, right? From the religious authorities. That's what I had a very hard time finding. But you're absolutely right. Yes.
Basic acceptance as people of the book.
Yes, but it is kind of checkered, right? There are other comments along with them. Right? They're the people that misunderstood the book, right? They're the people whose book is distorted, right? Who didn't copy it down correctly, or were so hard-hearted and so blind and so deaf, right, that they couldn't get the entire message. So, yes, on the theological level, it gets a little more racy. Now, interestingly, Islam was never weighted down, right, by the blood libel. It was never weighted down by issues of Jews desecrating the wafer of Christ, right? That whole deicidal freight was never in Islam, and many have argued, and it's a raging debate, that relations between Jews and Islam prior to the formation of the State of Israel were more or less dull and normal. Not ideal, right, but nothing like what you saw in Christian host societies. And back to another remark you made, yes, the only way to get at the complexity of this is to go to literature, which is why a completely different paper of philo-Semitic literature needs to be offered, and it has been noted again and again and again that philo-Semites often show anti-Semitic tendencies and vice versa, right, because of the complexity of humanity.
Because the subject is marginalized, as you say, for good reason. It's subject for good reason. You read Amos Ceylon's new book on the history of the German Jews, and you don't find any love. You look at every page in the book, as my students read it, it's hard to find. You just get depressed and more depressed and more depressed constantly. That's why my student told me it's depressing. I said, yeah, I'm sorry, that's been something fun. But the point is, where do you find kind of the story? And I think what you touched upon, and I think Yossi Dan is now writing about it, Professor Yossi Dan, Hebrew University, this notion of power that exists within the evangelist. It has its own final story. As, what's his name, the head of the American Dana Defamation League, Foxman once told me, they said, you know, what's this new coalition with the evangelists? He said, you know, they have also an end to the story, but they said, I'm ready to wait for the end. At the end, we'll talk about it. But in the meantime, they really love us and so on, and we're going with them. This kind of love, I think, is interesting. This kind of like passion for this group. We're going to work with you, we're going to save you, not just because you're weak.
Right, so what you're referring to, if there's any category I put forward, would be survivalist, right? Philo-Semitism, the appreciation of Jewish survival. The question I would ask you, it is kind of similar to the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, after all, just with a kind of positive smiley face, right? The theme in the protocols of the elders of Zion is they're everywhere, they're strong, learn from them so that you can defeat them. I mean, there's a genetic relation or a family resemblance, right, between this political respect, right, for the power, and you don't really mean the Jews, you must mean the state of Israel, right? That must be what you're speaking about. No?
It's all of eugenics that you became was anti-Semitism in the end of the 19th century. It was developed scientifically and was related to racism, it was related to, in addition to the economic issues that were also another kind of like aspect that came with Marxism and so on. And here, so like this is something, you know, this is a unique case, needs to be cherished, needs to be endorsed, needs to be supported, because it's something enlightenment.
This we've seen before. This is not new, right? This type of appreciation for the power and the reach and the scope, right, of Jews. But we have to qualify what type of power we're speaking about. Is it their military prowess? Is there economic prowess? Right? The state of Israel opens up all new types of possibilities of Jewish power, let's say. I would be very skeptical of the category for, I don't know, maybe my Jewish genes are screaming at me, right? Or there's something that makes me very skeptical of any sort of public acknowledgement that we really like these people. Yeah. We should be like these people have something to teach us. But I want to go back to whoever it was that made the remark before. What is really interesting reading through the literature on Philo-Semitism are these kinds of cocktails of Philo-Semitic and anti-Semitic impulses which inhere in one person, right? So it's never, like you said, you're a political scientist, you don't believe in sincerity, right? I'm a professor of literature, I don't believe in homogeneity, right? Or simplicity in any human psyche. So my view is, it's a little bit of both, actually, if we must break down the category, right? But I do think it's precedented, right? The awesome respect for the power of the Jews has a long and unfortunately very, very negative lineage.
If I may, one just sorry for the, because the notion which you mentioned, root, the conversion, their sincerity was the only criteria. This was the Philo-Semitism of a different nature, so you want to belong and how sincere you are. Therefore, the entry is so much more difficult. We will get you there because we really see you want to be part of that.
But they're biblical scholars. I think Ruth had something up her sleeve. I mean, just in the analysis of what Ruth is up to over there. Inheritance and Boaz. And, well, anyhow, and then, in other words, in our conversation, what's coming out is everything can be subjected to the evil eye, right, of scholarly analysis, which I think is a good category, right? The cynical view. I mean, I like your statement. I'm a political scientist. I don't believe in sincerity. I fully concur, but coming from another discipline, right? I don't believe in authenticity or people who are genuine. So I don't trust Ruth. I don't know what Ruth's game was, right? What was she up to, right? I'll never leave her be. All right, other remarks? Yes? Sorry.
Is there any structure to contemporary Philo-Semitism in our society, such as a journal, a newspaper, an organization? Reflecting on your comments, you've given us a series of intellectual viewpoints, but I haven't felt a collective body that represents this.
Okay, in Jerusalem, help me, Professor Shane, the International Christian Embassy, this thing that was set up in Jerusalem, which apparently was unprecedented, right? So that's a body that does tremendous amount of work for, let's say, poor Jews and feeds them and clothes them. It's very interested on the activism level with rescuing, let's say, Jewish refugees from various godforsaken parts of the world, right? So that's kind of on a collective level. There were some journals in the 20s and 30s in Germany called the Philo-Semite, right? But they disappeared. Is there any other? No, I can't think of anything outside of the evangelical.
Makoya.
Yeah, this is the Deutsch.
My name is Michael Gonzalez. I'm wondering if, from the perspective of a sociologist, you can look at the phenomenon in a kind of what you call a control group sense, both historically and religiously, by looking at the relatively small but apparently very flourishing Jewish community that existed in China. But this goes back many centuries, and it's encapsulated in time. And they were in an area which was not affected by the desert religions. I mean, so it's rather isolated. Are there texts available which illuminate the Chinese response?
Well, the Jews of China and the Jews of India are interesting in the study of anti-Semitism because they didn't get much anti-Semitism, and this is the horrible part, and they basically disappeared. Right? So, in other words, the community is disintegrated. Right? They're very small. Right? There's some around, yeah. Of course, but what is interesting sociologically, right, is people have wondered if anti-Semitism is the glue of Judaism, right? And these are usually Jewish sociologists that are saying, is hatred of Jews paradoxically, right, extremely good for the preservation of Judaism, right? Of course, Israelis will have, hardcore Zionist Israelis will have a very different answer to that response than some type of, I don't know, Philip Roth, right? Read Operation Shylock, for example, where there's another person called Philip Roth running around Israel who wants to send all the Jews back, right, to their ghettos and shtetls in Poland, right? That's Operation Shylock. So there are, within the Jewish intellectual tent, there are very, very, very differing responses to that problematic, right, of anti-Semitism's role in maintaining and preserving the Jewish people. Again, it's the type of irony that a professional writer of fiction handles much better than a professor of comparative literature, right? Because it's so nuanced and freighted psychologically. Yes, sir.
Thank you for your comments. By the way, just a minor correction. Zygmunt Bauman left, or I should say fled, Poland in '68 after the so-called anti-Zionist wave.
No, I said
of course, the Soviets preceded the current new left anti-Zionist wave by 30 years.
Right. No, my remark was astonishingly he stayed after World War II. How many Polish Jews actually stayed? They stayed in Poland.
30,000.
30 to 40.
Roughly after, came back after World War II. Those who fled the Soviet Union in large measure. But I'm somewhat curious why you seem to be so critical of many of your colleagues who've written very critically of philo-Semitism when you yourself point out the Janus-based nature of philo-Semitism. That there are many different types of philo-Semitism. Actually, I met one of the women who leads this group in Jerusalem, International Christian Alliance or whatever, who actually met at a Shabbat dinner. Certainly someone who clearly welcomes Jewish life. But there are many kinds of philo-Semitism. I've been among Germans who say, "Oh, we're so sorry what we did to you." It's not very pleasant to hear such forms of philo-Semitism. But there are many different variances in philo-Semitism. You said the new type, these Christian fundamentalists who support Israel. It's a form of philo-Semitism. On the other hand, you have left-wingers in Europe who say, "We like Jews. We like Jews." So for instance, the head of the publisher of the Repubblica, which is the leading sort of progressive journal in Italy, said, we like our Jews as long as they don't dare support Israel. So there are many different forms of philo-Semitism. So I don't understand why you're so critical of those other intellectuals who've attacked philo-Semitism as being at best Janus-based, or I should say often Janus-based.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think on par, I agree with the critique, right, that very few forms of philo-Semitism are authentic or without, shall we say, some type of anti-Semitic dross in there. But I don't know if I could necessarily, on a personal level, I don't think I could live in a world, right, where my political myopia, right, would lead me to assume that every non-Jewish person, right, who actually claims to either like me or not dislike me, right, really dislike me, I couldn't live that way. Psychologically, I would go crazy, right? It would induce a form of psychosis in me, personally, in terms of everyday ethics, to think that there's no possibility, right, of a non-Jew liking Jews or not being particularly obsessed by Jews. So while I respect, right, the ferocity of the critique of philo-Semitism, I have to leave something open. I think Georgetown, from what I can see now, is a philo-Semitic institution. I've only been here 1 month, but I think the support for Jews here is fabulous. Right? To me, that's
what about open and then philo-Semitic? Or indifferent to whether you're Jewish or not Jewish?
It could be, it could be. But it's, I mean, quite frankly, I've heard stories about what Georgetown was like in the 60s from students that graduated here, and it seems like a completely different institution. Something, from what I've heard, has really, really changed in the last 30 years. So I don't know. Again, like I said, I cannot go through life with that form of thinking. I think it's very unhealthy, right? That they hate us. They all, even the ones that say they like us, hate us. I just couldn't live that way, which doesn't mean that you have to agree with me, but I just find that a very
I assume neither one nor the other.
Yeah.
What are some of the literary texts that you feel treat the subjects well?
Okay, so there's Thomas Mann's Seven Manifestos on Jews. Thomas Mann is my favorite writer. All right, so Mann's treatment in actually his literary essays, Seven Manifestos on the Jews. The really interesting writer I discovered in researching this over the last 6 months is a pornographer by the name of Leopold Sacher-Masoch, whose most famous work is called Venus in Furs. He wrote another, he's really into fur. All his Jewish protagonists are always wearing furs. He wrote a series of 21 or 22 fabulous short stories. He's a very interesting character, this fellow, called Jewish Life. And apparently he was extremely knowledgeable about Jewish customs, especially from Galicia. No one can figure out how he knew this stuff, but he apparently had a very multicultural upbringing. His father was a diplomat, the usual story, right? The usual elite kid who gets into the other. He's interesting. There's actually a whole lineage, right? Boccaccio, right, has a wonderful little tale about Abraham, right, the courteous Jew, who actually is more of a Catholic than the Pope is, right? Chaucer, okay, lasciate ogni speranza, right, let it go. I've read articles that Shylock is that the Merchant of Venice is a philo-Semitic text. Yeah, right, that this is an unprecedented portrait or type of portraiture of the Jew. Now, obviously, that's open to debate, right? That he lends motivation for the first time in the history of this particular constellation of literature. He gives the Jew motivation, which is very important to professors of literature. Can you understand why the characters do what they do, right? Also, I mean, if you really want to get into a lecture on the Merchant of Venice, I've always thought in 16th century England, as the audience was leaving the theater and getting into their SUVs, right? They're driving home, saying, "Well, wasn't that great?" It's interesting, though. The Jew was lawful but not merciful, and the Christians were neither lawful nor merciful, right? I mean, that is an obvious implication of Act 4, right, of the Merchant of Venice, right? At least the Jew was lawful. He obeyed the laws, but he wasn't merciful, right? And the Christians are neither merciful nor lawful. Look what they do to him, look what they do to his daughter at the end of the text. So I wonder if Shakespeare, you never know if these authors did this on purpose, right? But I wonder if this is kind of that subversive theme, right, that you can only get at, by the way, in literature. Political science can't touch that, right? That level, right, of complexity just doesn't come out in politics, right? It's tacky. More. Should I continue or should I mean, Lessing's Nathan the Jew is, Nathan the Wise, this is not Nathan the Jew. Nathan the Wise is really a piece of work. Mark Twain wrote some really weird stuff on Jews, I have to say. Are we winding it down?
We have time for one last question. Before that, let me, by the way, also say that the event this afternoon is co-sponsored by Tom Bonshaw, Professor Bonshaw, and the program in Religion, Politics, and Peace. Why don't we take one more question, and then those of you who want to linger and chat with Jacques, feel free to do so. Well, with that, let me thank Jacques and thank you all.